following presentation is based around demonstrating understanding to the key aspects of psychological methodology and research on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on sleep patterns for individuals with particular reference to different genders. In the presentation, we will cover the following three sections. Section 1, evaluate the use of experiments, correlation, observation, case study and questionnaire research methods, and explain the importance of ethical considerations in psychological research. Section 2, we will explain what is meant by the following terms: independent variables, dependent variables, confounding variables, controls and sources of bias. Explain how variables can be controlled and sources of bias can be reduced, and evaluate the use of different sampling techniques in psychological research. Section 3 will cover the outcomes and analysis of primary research on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on sleep patterns for individuals with particular reference to different genders. Experiments take place in a controlled environment where the independent variable is manipulated by the researcher and the effect on the dependent variable is then measured. All external variables are controlled as much as possible. This method has been used by psychologists globally as it gives them more control over what happens, aiding cause and effect, as well as giving more understanding about why events occur and why people behave the way they do. Lab experiments take place within a lab, and the experiments are chosen to investigate further on topics like memory and perception. Behaviour can also be measured using lab experiments, but it's more difficult as operating as a variable can be very complex. Experiments consist of two types of variables, which are the independent variable and the dependent variable. Within experiments, the researcher will always alter one variable. This is known as the independent variable. This variable will manipulate the experiment and not depend on anything. The dependent variable is what the researcher will measure. The dependent variable relies on the independent variable to achieve validity, and there is a high amount of control over variables to obtain the most valid results possible. The independent variable is changed, the time and place of the experiment is chosen, as well as the number of participants, in what circumstances, and using standard procedure. Experiments are beneficial as they offer a high level of control of external variables, as well as being an easy process to follow and replicate. However, external validity is low as results are hard to generalise without a lab environment. A correlation is the relationship between two naturally occurring variables, and a correlational research focuses on finding out if two or more variables are related and in which way. It is the analysis of the relationship between covariables and measures how strong the relationship is, but no cause and effect can be confirmed. An example of this would be looking at how strong the link between liver disease and alcohol consumption is, which in this case would be the two variables. In this type of study, there is no direct manipulation of the IV by the researcher, and a correlation is used more as a tool of analysis than a research method, as it uses statistics to test the relationship between variables. Correlational analysis is a statistical technique that is used for the investigation of the strength of the relationship between two variables, and the analysis will reveal either a positive correlation, which is one variable increasing while the other decreases, a negative correlation, which is one variable decreasing while the other increases, or no correlation. The correlation analysis is beneficial when requiring awareness of behaviour between two variables of the behaviour. However, it can't produce the effects of other variables out with the two that are being researched. Observations focus on certain categories of behaviours or events and are used as part of research that includes operational definitions of the events or behaviours that are to be observed. An observation is when behaviour is monitored and then recorded. This can be done in a naturalistic approach where participants are observed in their own environment with no manipulations, or a controlled observation where variables are manipulated in a ready-made environment or a research lab. Before any observations, the investigator will decide which behaviours and events are to be researched. An unstructured observation, such as naturalistic or controlled, will do the opposite and record the data continuously, paying attention to any unusual events or changes that stand out. There are various types of observational methods, such as structured, unstructured, naturalistic, controlled, overt and covert, which will depend on the location, role of the researcher and participants' consent. There is no direct manipulation of variables in an observation. Observations are great for gaining a deeper understanding into the subject area as well as gaining more detailed data, although there is a risk of uncontrolled external variables as well as being hard to replicate in some instances, for example, if the observation was conducted in a natural setting. A case study is an in-depth analysis of individual or a small amount of people. They usually focus on one aspect of behaviour that takes place over many years. This method also uses other research methods. For example, participants may be given a questionnaire, take part in an interview using open-ended questions, be observed, take part in experiments, or their letters and diaries may be used for content analysis. People who have a working or personal relationship with the main participant may also be included in the research, as they can offer insight into the person's past and present experiences. A case study offers the advantage of having flexibility when collecting data and enables researchers to investigate in more detail, but there is the limitations of cost and biased opinion. A questionnaire is a self-reporting method which enables participants the ability to provide information about themselves. It consists of a set of pre-written questions about the desired topic, which is then printed or made available online for participants to complete. It can also be completed over the phone or face-to-face. They can be issued as an individual group, as an individual or as part of a study, and are used to find out what the average answers would be to then compare to any unusual or different outcomes of the data collected. Now, both open and closed questions can be used, and some questions may be asked twice in a different way to test for honesty and consistency in responding. The questionnaires are cost effective and offer privacy to the participants, but response rates can be low, and there is also the risk that participants may not fully understand some questions. Now, ethics within psychological research are extremely important as they ensure the safety of the public and integrity of psychologists while conducting research or studies. There are guidelines and moral codes to follow and take into consideration when carrying out research or experiments. They are regulated by and instructed by the British Psychological Society and are seen as what is right or acceptable in the process to a scientific achievement. Ethical guidelines include informed consent, where participants should always agree to be involved in a study and should fully understand every aspect of what they are taking part in, what it includes and what they have the right to withdraw. Debrief is where participants must be made aware of the results and fully debriefed of the outcome. Confidentiality ensures participants feel confident enough that all data remains private and confidential. Deception is ensuring no information is withheld or purposely misled unless an exemption from ethics committee or low risk of distress. The right to withdraw enables participants to leave the study or experiment at any time and all their data removed from the research and destroyed in protection from harm, which ensures participants are protected from emotional or physical harm continuously, and that participation doesn't cause any lasting effects to the person's life from start to finish. The ethical guidelines aid researchers in deciding if their proposed research is acceptable, and although ethical guidelines are used and followed, it is still very difficult to determine the exact outcome of a study or experiment. A variable is a technical term used to describe something and can be an action like behaviour, a quality such as patience, or a characteristic like height or weight, and they can change or vary. The independent variable is the variable the psychologist will change, and the dependent variable is what is measured. An extraneous variable is anything other than the IV that could have an influence on the dependent variable. It is an uncontrolled variable that should be removed. If it fails to be controlled and it affects the findings negatively, then it is known as a confounding variable. A control variable is any variable which is held constant in a research study and is not a variable of interest, and it is controlled as it may affect the outcome of the study. Sources of bias can occur at any stage of research, including design, data collection, and data analysis, where an error happens in the testing or sampling stage due to encouragement over outcomes or answers, which can come from several extraneous variables. Now, this can be reduced in a number of ways, including creating a study where participants are unable to guess the purpose, so participants' effects can be reduced. Ensuring all materials and conditions are the same for each participant to ensure the same experience is met, and to reduce situational variables. Demand characteristics can cause the participant to behave in a way to support or disrupt the research, and this can be reduced by ensuring participants have no way of finding out which condition they are taking part in, which is usually achieved by deception to enable natural behaviour. And the investigator effects can be controlled using an assistant who is not aware of the hypothesis of the study, as well as the participants. Now, controlling variables is important in research as they can be fixed or eliminated to clearly identify the relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable. Now, sampling refers to the participants who are taking part in the research. The number of people taking part is the sample size. Determining the size of the sample is very important, as this could result in the findings being unmanageable if there are not enough people or too many. Samples from participants are selected via 3 sampling techniques, such as random, opportunity, and volunteer. Each sampling technique comes with benefits and limitations. A random sample is where participants are selected randomly from the target population. Now, this is beneficial as the researcher has no control over selection and free from researcher bias. However, the process is time-consuming and a representative sample is not guaranteed. An opportunity sample involves the researcher selecting anyone who is ready and available to take part. Now, this technique saves time, offers convenience, and requires less effort. However, as the researcher has complete influence over selection, there is a risk of research bias and results may not represent the target population. A volunteer sample is where the researcher will advertise for volunteers to take part by using advertising. Now, this may also include a questionnaire being easily accessible to the public, and participants put themselves forward to take part. The advantage of this technique is that it requires minimum input from the researchers, but its limitations include volunteer bias, as only the most cooperative people will respond, and only those who come across the advert have the chance to take part, affecting the generalisability of the findings. Now, this is now the analysis and outcome of primary research on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on sleep patterns for individuals with particular to reference to different genders. The hypothesis for the research is the COVID-19 pandemic had a significant effect on sleep disruption in male and female sleep patterns in the UK. The null hypothesis states that there is no relationship between the 2 variables that are being studied and that one variable does not affect the other. It implies that the results are due to chance and are not important in terms of supporting the idea that is being investigated. The null hypothesis for this investigation would be there is no link between the COVID-19 pandemic and sleep disruption in male and female sleep patterns in the UK. The research method used was a case study on gender differences in sleep disruption during COVID-19, cross-sectional analysis from 2 UK nationally representative surveys collected during the first and second month after the 2020 lockdown in the UK. Now, this method allowed for more in-depth research. Self-reporting surveys were included for participants, so results are free from researcher bias and can highlight changes and differences within an individual's sleep pattern, which can then be tested to prove significance of the hypothesis or not. Statistical testing offers a method of determining if a hypothesis should be accepted or rejected. Inferential statistics help us form conclusions about the population from the sample taken from it. A significant difference indicates that the difference between 2 groups or samples and is actually due to the effect of the independent variable on the dependent variable and unlikely to have happened by chance. And a significant or not significant difference indicates if the null hypothesis of the study should be accepted or not. The objective of the study was to examine changes in sleep problems and duration, focusing on different genders. From the Understanding Society COVID-19 study, participants aged 17 and above from the first wave are linked to the most recent wave before the pandemic completed during 2018 and 19. The sample size was 14,073 and 58% were women. The COVID-19 survey data was obtained from the 2nd to the 31st of May 2020, and participants were selected from 5 nationally representative studies within the UK who shared characteristics. Sample size was 8,547 and 57% were women. Explanatory and control variables were generated by collecting behavioural and status changes during the COVID-19 pandemic that could be factors that influence changes in sleep duration and quality. The 2 outcome variables that were studied were change in sleep problems, whether the participant lost sleep over worry before and after the COVID-19 pandemic, change in self-reported hours of sleep duration before and after the outbreak. Changes shown are generated from the participants' answers using a scale of 0 to 9, with a higher score representing worse sleep problems with more sleep loss and 0 indicating no changes. Statistical tests are classified in 2 types, which are parametric and non-parametric. Parametric tests are better at detecting a significant effect due to calculating using the actual scores rather than ranked scores. Non-parametric tests are used for experiments where the data is at least nominal and repeated measures have been used. Research analysis for this study was conducted using the chi-squared times 2 test, and it is a non-parametric test. The test is used to compare the observed value with the expected value. Its purpose is to figure out if a difference between observed data and expected data, if it's down to chance, or if there's a relationship between the 2 variables. Now, the formula for the chi-squared test is as follows. So it's chi-squared equals sum of the observed data value minus the expected value squared divided by the expected value. Now, results shown that on average people in the UK experienced more sleep loss during the first 4 weeks of lockdown. Women reported more sleep loss than men, and daily sleep duration increased on an average by 10 minutes. Men gained between 7 and 8 more minutes of sleep each day than women, averaging to around 49 minutes extra per week, as can be shown here on this graph. Now, the chi-squared result was 5.276, the critical value was 3.841, giving a p-value of p equals 0.01. Now, as the level of significance is 0.05 on the probability table and the results are higher than the critical value, we can accept the hypothesis as statistically significant and reject the null hypothesis. Now, from the findings, it was concluded that the COVID-19 pandemic not only increased sleep disruption, but also increased traditional gender roles, with women having increased duration on family errands, such as caregiving and domestic duties. Men's sleep was more influenced by employment status and financial changes. The study expands our understanding of the gendered impact that lockdowns had during the COVID-19 pandemic and offers clear and beneficial organisational and employment policy implications for pandemic and lockdowns in the future, although it may suffer from recall and attrition bias. All datasets were anonymised and participants had no involvement in the development of the research questions, study design, recruitment, conduct or analysing the results. Permission was granted via the UK Data Service to access the datasets, and both surveys received ethics approval. The study was supported and funded by Leverhulme Trust, Leverhulme Centre for Demographic Science and ERC Advanced Grant. Now, I hope you have enjoyed this presentation and thanks very much for listening.